Alexander the Great, King of Macedon, Lord of Asia. In 13 years of campaigning, he never lost a battle. Yet, his empire did not last. If his enemies could not stop him, what finally did? Welcome to the Files. Today we investigate the impossible career of a man who conquered the known world before his 33rd birthday, and the hidden forces that eventually brought his unstoppable momentum to a grinding halt. To understand Alexander's success, we must first look at the weapon he inherited. His father, Philip II of Macedon, had transformed a backwater kingdom into a military powerhouse, creating a professional army the likes of which the world had never seen. The heart of this machine was the Macedonian phalanx. While the traditional Greek hoplite used an 8-foot spear, Philip's men carried the sarissa, an 18-foot pike that kept enemies at a lethal distance. But the phalanx was only one piece of the puzzle. Alexander perfected the use of combined arms. He used the phalanx as an immovable anvil, and his elite companion cavalry as a devastating hammer. This tactical synergy, combined with light infantry and archers, allowed him to adapt to any terrain and any foe. But equipment isn't everything. Why did Alexander keep winning? Why did the Persian Empire, with its vast wealth and millions of subjects, fail to stop a king from a small northern Greek state? The answer lies in how Alexander thought, and how he led. Alexander was a master of logistics and speed. He moved his army with a velocity that paralyzed his opponents. More importantly, he led from the front, taking calculated risks that inspired absolute loyalty from his men and sheer terror in his enemies. Darius III of Persia repeatedly tried to crush Alexander with overwhelming numbers, but Darius lacked Alexander's tactical flexibility. At Granicus and Issus, the Persian king saw his superior numbers neutralized by geography and Alexander's sheer audacity. In 331 BCE, on the plains of Gaugamela, the two kings met for a final masterclass in warfare. Darius chose the ground specifically to favor his massive army, even leveling the terrain to let his scythed chariots run free. It should have been Alexander's end. Let's look at the evidence. Darius had the numbers, the chariots, and the perfect ground. Alexander was outnumbered at least 5-1, but he didn't charge blindly. He did something much more sophisticated. He manipulated the entire Persian line. Alexander moved his army in an oblique line, drawing the Persian wings outward. As the Persians adjusted to cover the flank, a gap opened in their center. It was exactly what Alexander had been waiting for. He formed his cavalry into a giant wedge and dove straight for Darius. This wasn't just a charge, it was a surgical strike. By creating and exploiting that single opening, Alexander forced Darius to flee the field. The Persian Empire was effectively dead. Alexander had won the world, but now he faced an enemy he couldn't outmaneuver. Years of campaigning followed. Alexander pushed deeper into India, crossing mountains and facing war elephants. But as the miles increased, the momentum began to fail. Not because of a foreign army, but because of the men who had carried him there. By the time they reached the Hyphasis River, Alexander's men were exhausted, homesick, and terrified of the reports of even larger empires to the east. For the first time, Alexander faced a battle he couldn't win, a battle against his own army's will. At the Hyphasis, the army refused to go any further. Alexander pleaded, he sulked in his tent, he threatened, but the men remained silent. The conqueror of the world had finally met a limit he could not cross. He was forced to turn back. Was this his first real defeat? In the technical sense, no. He had never been beaten on the field, but in the strategic sense, the campaign was over. The dream of a global empire was beginning to fracture against the simple reality of human endurance. Alexander returned to Babylon in 323 BCE, planning new conquests in the west. But history had other plans. In the heat of the summer, the king fell ill. Within 2 weeks, the man who had survived 1,000 battles was dead. He was only 32. The cause of his death remains one of history's great mysteries. Was it poison, malaria, or simply a body worn out by years of trauma and excess? We may never know for certain, but the result was immediate and catastrophic. Alexander never lost a battle, but he lost his empire. Without his singular will to hold it together, The vast territory he conquered was immediately torn apart by his generals. The unity he fought for died with him in that room in Babylon. What stopped Alexander? Not the Persians, Egyptians, or Indians. He was stopped by the limits of human nature, the exhaustion of his men, and finally, his own mortality. He reached for the horizon, but forgot he was only human. Perhaps his greatest strength, his absolute refusal to stop, was also his greatest flaw. He built an empire that required him to be everywhere at once, and when he was gone, there was nothing but a void. His conquest was absolute, but his legacy was chaos. The battlefield gives us the result. History gives us the evidence. But understanding why it happened, that is why we open the files. Subscribe. There are more files waiting on this desk. Until the next case file.